If you've ever wondered what might happen if a serial killer got together with a true crime thriller and a supernatural horror and they all somehow managed to spawn a dark little bundle of joy that immediately took to the family's 8mm home movie camera, well, you would probably end up with a terrifying and weirdly awkward horror child thing that is sometimes gripping and other times super cringy. Welcome to my attic. And yes, my cabin is gigantic, just try not to think about it too much. Today we'll be examining this weird, two-faced creature of a movie close up, so we can hopefully figure out why it's both brilliant and baffling depending on who's watching it. So grab yourself a glass of juice, throw your feet up on the couch, and turn out the lights. Unless, of course, you're afraid to. That is Ellison Oswalt. Ellison is a struggling writer who hasn't had a hit in 10 years, and he's decided the best way to obtain authentic material for his new true crime bestseller is to move into the home of a family who's recently been permanently retired, without their consent. Why did he do that, you ask? Because research. And I'm guessing his wife and his children would probably have been very upset with his decision if he told them about it.
The movie opens abruptly with a family of 4 dangling from a tree, as a saw, wielded by we don't know quite who yet, cuts through a branch, converting Mother Nature into a devious counterweight. The imagery's oversaturated and dense with grain, implying it's an 8mm home movie. The footage is also slowed down, and that forces us to watch the imagery for a lot longer than normal. The local sheriff arrives right as Ellison's family is moving in. The sheriff's not happy Ellison's exploiting their local tragedy for book material, nor is he happy with Ellison's decision to buy the murder house. Ellison's unfazed by the officer's direct, curt tone, and that tells us this is not the first time he's had this talk with the police. When his wife asks what happened, Ellison plays it off as if nothing's wrong. And not long after they've moved in, Ellison heads upstairs to explore the attic. This is when we're properly introduced to Christopher Young's devilish soundtrack. After killing a seemingly random scorpion, he finds a collection of home movies tucked away in a box. One's titled Pool Party, another's called Barbecue. There's even a lovely landscaping movie called Lawn Work.
These home movies sure do sound wholesome, don't they? And they are wholesome. If you're into snuff movies involving lovely innocent families. Remember how that used to be one of the biggest sections in Blockbuster?
Ellison learns the movies are far from wholesome after watching the creatively titled Family Hanging Out, which is the movie we watch in the opening scene. And after he's watched the video, his daughter Ashley gets lost looking for the bathroom in the middle of the night. This is meant to be a subtle first sign of the young girl becoming disoriented by something. After the second video, titled Barbecue, Ellison phones the police, but he hangs up after weighing the possibility this discovery could restore his previous celebrity author status. As the head of this household, his decision tells us an awful lot about his character and the story we're about to watch. Choosing not to tell the police brings this first act to a close.
I think opening the film with a clip of one of these hyper-realistic 8mm home movies was a brilliant move. It sets a devastating tone, and it does it without having to use a single line of dialogue or explanation. And the choice to use the home movie aesthetic adds a menacing layer of peculiar realism, because most of us associate those kind of movies with pleasant childhood family memories. But with all this going for it early on, there are also some worrying signs of some very loose writing.
Young Ashley's disorientation is meant to plant a seed in our heads that she's starting to drift a bit mentally. But it's perfectly normal and probably expected for a child her age not to be able to find the bathroom in the middle of the night in a strange house. It's also perfectly normal half the audience would have missed this little detail.
And finally, Ellison's decision to keep these grisly discoveries to himself tells us his ambition comes before the victims of these crimes and the well-being of his own family. Now, normally, that is vital character information, and we do want to know these things, but we're only 20 minutes into this story.
Every movie, regardless of genre or subgenre, needs a lead character for us in the audience to support. And that lead character is supposed to be at least relatable, if not likable.
If we already know Ellison is not the family man he's pretending to be, then unfortunately, in horror terms, we also know what's going to happen to the poor fella later on. Great opening tone, shaky foundation.
Immediately following his decision to keep things hush-hush, Ellison starts hearing things around the house as per horror movie procedure. And then his son Trevor, whose haircut is one of the scariest things in this film, suffers a relapse when he experiences a night terror. He hasn't had one in a while apparently, but something's brought this one on, and it's pretty intense.
On a personal side note, one of my movie pet peeves is when casting agents cast kids who don't look anything like their siblings or either of their parents. This actually happened in one of my absolute favorite horror movies. They're lucky the rest of the movie was amazing.
Ellison watches the next movie in the series featuring a family coming to a watery end in their own swimming pool. And at 28 minutes into this story, Scott Derrickson shows us the bad guy in full. The next day, young Trevor gets in trouble at school for drawing a picture of 4 people hanging from a tree. Instead of responding to any of these unsettling events, Ellison watches the next video, which features another family having their esophaguses seen to as something shiny you'd find in a kitchen drawer.
Sorry folks, sometimes I've got to speak YouTube-ish.
The imagery sends Ellison to the bottom of his whiskey bottle, but not to the phone to dial 911. Eventually, he spots symbols on the walls in the videos, and that sends him into the internet research portion of the movie. It's as tropey gets, but if it's done properly, it won't get in the way of the story, and I'd suggest that's the case here. While he's Googling his problems, the power goes out in the house, and then it sounds like somebody's walking around up in the attic. So, for no other reason than to create a scary scene, he wanders around in the house in the dark for a very, very long time.
This is a minor editing issue, so it's not a deal breaker. Yet.
When the loud banging eventually breaks the tension, it's less a surprise than it is a sense of relief they've finally brought the excessive wandering to a close. Inevitably, he ends up back in the attic, armed with a butter knife, doing his best impersonation of Ellen Burstyn in The Exorcist. And this time, he finds a poisonous snake. When you consider he'd already killed a deadly scorpion, it's baffling why he hasn't called in a professional to inspect the house for his family's safety. Then he falls through the roof, knocking himself unconscious, even though it would have only been a 3 to 4 foot drop from where he initially came to rest. This brings a local deputy into the story, played by James Ransone, who in my opinion, single-handedly saved It Chapter 2 from being deemed a critical disaster. Ransone is a keen police officer and a fan of Ellison's book, so Ellison uses his enthusiasm to coax him into getting him sensitive information from the police database.
I can't decide if this is another strike against Ellison's character or if he's just doing what he needs to get to the bottom of things. And to me, the fact I can't figure that out halfway into this movie is actually a strike against director Scott Derrickson.
His son's drawings show the figure Ellison's been seeing, and his son refers to him as Mr. Boogie, which confuses everything for me given I can't remember its actual name. This is where the narrative really starts fraying for me. Instead of plot developments or character growth, images of Mr. Bagel Ballbag, the latex Halloween mask we know as the demon behind whatever's going on, starts appearing in all sorts of conspicuous locations. Then Ellison finds video of himself falling through the roof with lots of kids' hands pulling him down the rest of the way through the hole. This is followed by typical haunted house style events. The computer turns on by itself, things go bump in the dark, and then the same scene from earlier is repeated with young Trevor having another night terror in a different location. And then a Rottweiler shows up in the backyard, because horror movie.
Ruff. Big scary dog.
Then the children appear behind him, backlit in artificial fog. It is worth noting they're standing exactly as a group of children would. There's no creepy manipulation of their postures or movements, and they're exactly as menacing as a few kids standing in your backyard would be. Then the couple have the let's get out of here argument, but Ellison still refuses to leave. Despite everything going on around him, he's still clinging to the idea he can turn it all around and make a bestseller out of it. Then Deputy Ransone swings by and Ellison lets him in on what he's looking into, including the ballbag demon. So, Ransone refers him to this movie's Oracle character in Vincent D'Onofrio's occult specialist college professor trope.
D'Onofrio tells him exactly what he needs to know to progress to the next stage of this story. That is what these archetypes do.
Oracle characters have been in stories spanning all major cultures for thousands of years. They're a necessary tool, and one of the most famous contemporary versions is The Matrix, who went straight for the jugular in calling her the Oracle.
But where the Oracle was interesting and mysterious and cryptic and wise beyond our comprehension, D'Onofrio's is lazy, and unoriginal. Unfortunately, that brings the tension to a screeching halt. Which is in no way a judgment of Vincent D'Onofrio. He earned his acting stripes 40 years ago.
There are many like it, but this one is mine!
This is just a writing problem.
Unfortunately, another 20 minutes worth of wandering around in the dark house with a baseball bat denies us any plot development or character growth. Again, things turn on by themselves, the floorboards creak, walls thump, again, and then a pack of children in dollar store makeup walk around unseen to Ellison, but we see them, and their presence crushes any remaining creepiness from the first third of the movie like flicking the lights on in a dark movie theater. These kids look frickin' adorable. It's like they've misbehaved and ended up elbow deep in their mother's cake mix. There is some cool compositing work going on with the kids running around in slow motion while Ellison's kept at regular speed. This gives the disobedient little cherubs an otherworldly vibe, although given the choice, I'd prefer them to be scary.
Ellison decides to confide in Deputy Ransone, but the advice Ransone doles out misses the mark by 100 miles. It's either placed at the wrong point in the story or it shouldn't be dialogue at all.
Deputy Ransone suggests Ellison's knowledge of what happened to the family in the house is causing him stress, and that stress is causing him to imagine things. If Ransone would have suggested this earlier on, when things were less concrete for us, it might have helped to keep the lines blurred.
But at this stage of the story, we know he's not imagining things, and that means Ransone's advice creates a scene with no point.
Then his daughter does a drawing on the wall of the little girl who used to live there. That means both children are doing drawings. The younger child's are professional quality, and the older brother's, well, in the name of fairness, we'll just assume he couldn't see the paper through his bangs. And with all of these different things going on, I have all but forgotten about Ballbag the Demon. But then, all of a sudden, things perk up again, along with the intrigue, when somebody records Ellison while he's sleeping. But then he starts wandering around the house in the dark again, and oh, fuck me. It might all be a dream. It might not. But at this point in the story, we're not all that bothered either way, because we are now officially introduced to the Cake Batter Kids, along with a slew of obnoxious, unnecessary jump scares.
Sort of like that one. Like that one. But sorry, they felt completely excessive, and I was just trying to convey the sentiment.
And these jump scares are punctuated by a very rare glimpse of what I think is Ethan Hawke actually overacting. Then Ellison, the genius, finally decides to burn the movies and the projector before shouting at his incredibly patient and tolerant wife, who somehow didn't hear him falling from the attic or screaming the wallpaper off the walls 10 minutes ago. Then they poltergeist their way out of the place in the middle of the night, never to return. And in the car, Ellison officially declares there will be no book. And when he promises his wife he really means it, she hugs and kisses him emphatically, even though she spent the entire movie hounding him to finish a book so they could afford groceries next week. And for a financially struggling family, they make out surprisingly well, considering the home they move into next looks like something they might have bought from the governor of the state. And that night, Ellison finds the movies and the projector perfectly intact and rather predictably tucked away in the new attic. And while he's absorbing the shocking discovery, he also discovers his daughter has drugged his coffee with a bright green reanimator type substance he never saw or tasted, despite being thick and glowing green. His daughter proceeds to wipe out the entire family and records the event on the 8mm camera. And as the story comes to a dark, twisted close, we can presume she goes on to become the newest member of the Cake Batter gang, where they all live happily ever after in murderous bliss with their new uncle, Ballbag.
I've always been split on this movie because it feels like two films to me. Or one film written by two writers who never met each other and weren't aware of the film they were writing. When Sinister does work, it really works, and we're going to start there.
A lot of people credit the home movie segments as high points in Sinister, and I happen to agree with them. The home movies function as individual micro-horror stories. They're authentically grainy and damaged looking, and the lack of sound adds a sense of voyeurism. We feel the way Ellison's feeling as he's locked away in the dark attic watching the heinous acts in isolation. Scott Derrickson's decision to start the film with a clip of one of these ugly home movies sets a tone you won't find very often in horror. Another strong point for Sinister is Christopher Young's soundtrack. Every song's like a funeral dirge for your morbid entertainment. Even the track names are creepy, with songs like Never Go in Dad's Office and My Sick Piano, and my personal favorite, Don't Worry Daddy, I'll Make You Famous Again. I happen to be a fan of dark ambiances to the extent I make a lot of the sounds you hear in my videos, and as a fan, I can say Young's scoring is epic. The home movie vibe combined with Young's eerie sounds account for the majority of Sinister's spooky tone, and the remainder is down to a single performance. Ethan Hawke's one of those actors. When you're flipping through channels in your Sunday underwear, you stop flipping when you see him because whatever the movie, he's reliably believable in every one of his roles. In Sinister specifically, whether he's sneaking whiskey at 2 in the morning or cocking his head in response to a thud down the hall, he conveys his paranoia and fear in a way most young modern actors won't, probably because they're worried contorting their faces or sweating might have an adverse effect on their flawless appearances. Hawke was strongest early on in Sinister. Quietly turning to the whiskey was a great visual progression that demonstrated his devolving state without him having to say, "I'm starting to freak out," directly into the camera. Now, with all those positives, you might be wondering what I meant when I said Sinister feels like 2 movies. First off, there's a feeling things weren't entirely thought out, and I say that because the movie left me with some unanswered questions. In no particular order, before they moved into the house, Trevor's had night terrors, but what did they have to do with this story? Are they suggesting a connection with Uncle Ballbag the demon? Or have the episodes just started up again randomly? And if there was a connection between Trevor and Uncle Ballbag, does that explain Trevor's drawings of the dead family members? Because Ashley also drew photos of the dead family members, except she was connected to Uncle Ballbag because he chose her to join him in taking out her own family, including her brother Trevor. So why the fuck was he doing drawings? Also, when they recorded Ellison falling through the roof, who was holding the camera? It's meant to be the children of the living families doing it, but it certainly wasn't Ashley, who was downstairs in bed. Are we to assume Uncle Ballbag is also a cinematographer? We all know children are featured frequently in horror, and it is one of the hardest things to pull off successfully. Unfortunately, Sinister failed miserably in that department, and it did a lot of damage to the movie's overall plausibility. And did I already mention jump scares? Sorry. Again.
The jump scares were excessive. Now, I don't hate jump scares. I hate when they're used to fill space that should have been filled with good writing. You waiting for another one? In terms of the movie's overall enjoyability, unfortunately all of these things worked against Sinister. But to me, this movie's biggest problem is him. See, that didn't even scare me.
They showed Uncle Ballbag way too early, and for all the sinister things he's supposedly responsible for, his appearance was decidedly unsinister. Conceptually, an ancient demon who coerces kids into terminating their own families sounds brilliant in horror terms, but when he's revealed, he's more like a bass player who's angry about getting kicked out of a 90s cover band. Horror fans know you don't show the monster until much later on, and when you do show it, it's supposed to be scary. And if we stupid horror fans know that, it is not unreasonable to expect horror directors to know it too. After all, movie tickets are $20 a pop now, and that's to compensate for their ridiculous salaries. So, if you haven't seen Sinister yet, should you watch it? Or should you not move into a home right after something nasty happened in it in the first place?
This one is down to personal choice. If you like jump scares and plot holes don't keep you awake at night, you'll probably enjoy it. If you're still here, thank you for hanging out. If you've seen Sinister, I would love to hear your thoughts on it down in the comments. If you got nothing to do for the next 10 or 15 minutes, there's another video. And until next time, folks.